Got my gat. So you know it's time for a Redbeard review. What? So today I'm reviewing Underworld from 1927, or maybe 28. And it's one of the first gangster movies. It might be the first gangster movie, arguably, because I looked it up. I just Googled what's the first gangster movie, and it said that it was Little Caesar, which came out in 1931. And this came out in 1927, or maybe 28. I'll look it up to be sure. Yeah, 1927, according to Wikipedia. So yeah, so this came out in 1927, and it's obviously a mafia movie slash gangster movie or whatever. But maybe there were movies a lot like this before. I don't know. And this movie's basically about a bank robbery that goes wrong. It starts with a bank robbery, but that one goes right, and then the gangsters all go to their hideout and kind of laugh about it, like, ha ha ha, they never catch us, those coppers. It's a silent movie too. I didn't mention that, but once you were like used to just reading intertitles, it kind of feels like a talkie, like just a normal movie. Though there are a lot of intertitles, so much so it felt like they should have just made a talkie, but it was probably like right on the cusp of when that technology became readily available to everyone. Oh, actually, what I was reading, you might consider this like an early indie flick. I mean, it wasn't because, you know, camera technology was like not available to the public at the time, not in the capacity to make a movie anyway. But it was like a new director, new writer, kind of an upstart, I guess, or whatever you call it. Upstart? That's wrong. But a new director, a new person coming into the industry who like just had a hope and a dream to make this movie, I guess, and the studio didn't really back him on it. So they didn't give him a whole lot of money to make it. And they probably didn't want to spend the money to use the new technology to make this talkie or anything. I mean, when he wrote it, he probably didn't even know talkies were on the rise. They gave him, like, just enough money to make his movie, and he did. And then it, like, sold out so much, probably because it was, like, a brand new thing, being one of the first gangster movies ever. But it sold out so much that crowds were, like, lining up in the street to get in to see this movie. There were riots. No, there weren't. But it turned out to be, like, a huge hit, and might have started the mobster movie craze and noir craze that came about in the 30s a few years later, but it's hard to say. And like I said, like they don't even credit this as the first gangster movie, even though it's before Little Caesar, and it's totally a gangster movie. Oh, I was telling the plot, I guess. That was the other thing I thought was interesting, is that the main character is a girl named Feathers. And it's like everything we see is like seen through her perspective. And when she first comes into the gang, she's kind of like being wooed by the leader of the gang, whose name is like, it's like Fat Tony or something. That's not it. Fat Tony's from The Simpsons. It's like Buck Henry, something like that. He's kind of wooing this girl, but as he's doing it, he's like showing her around and being like, this is our gang. This is how we run the whole operation. And she's like, at first I thought maybe he was like training her to take over the gang or something. Like she was going to be his protege. And I was like, that would be interesting for a movie from the 20s, like a woman becoming the lead gangster or something. It didn't go that way, but for a second I thought that would have been interesting. And then they do this bank robbery that goes horribly wrong. And then Buck Henry, or whatever his name is arrested and thrown in jail, and he's gonna get hanged the next day. Oh, and but then they bust him out of jail, and there's this huge shootout that I was like really impressed with, and I wonder if like that was one of the reasons this sold out so well, just because there was like this amazing action-oriented fight between Buck Henry, the girl, and the cops. The girl wasn't shooting. It turns out she's not a gangster and wasn't gonna take over the gang, but like it was Buck Henry. Oh, and this guy they call Rolls Royce. And he's like a drunk who's really just a drunk. Oh, but the movie ends with him like, he was like, decides to go straight. And he like surrenders to the police, even though they were going to hang him. Now they're not anymore or something. I don't know. But he surrenders to them and they're like, okay, you're a good guy now, but you're still under arrest. I thought that was really good, actually. I was very impressed with it. I could see why this might have given birth to the gangster movies of the 30s, / mafia movies, / noir movies, whatever you want to call them. It was very exciting, and I was like really gripped by it for almost the whole thing. There was a part like right after they robbed the first bank, they like go to this like speakeasy, and they're just there for a very long time, and like nothing happens for a very long time. But like it's not like When Nothing Happened in Sunrise, and like literally just nothing happens, outside of like they play carnival games, Like here it's actually like they got around and you kind of get to know some of the characters or some of the other gangsters. So I guess it wasn't like a total loss of that time, but there was a lot of like that showiness that I was talking about with Sunrise that like makes it feel kind of gimmicky, like look at these things we're showing you. Movies were still fairly new, and like just being able to see things clearly like that I think was still a fairly big draw of films at the time. But outside of that, I don't think there's really anything I would say is a negative, really. I was really entertained, and like feels like it was really ahead of its time. Like I said, it felt more like a talkie for one thing. Like there was a lot of intertitles, a lot of things to explain. And there was a lot of scenes of dialogue that kind of made it a little sick with intertitles. But I think it was like they were paced out enough. It didn't become like a major issue. Like I said, gangster movies weren't being made, at least not of this caliber, not that I know of. Anyway, I'm not a film historian, but as far as I know, this was like the earliest gangster movie like this, where it just follows like these really horrible people for the entire movie. So yeah, it was like ahead of its time and like really unique for the era. I mean, if you watch it nowadays, you'll probably notice like many familiar tropes of gangster movies, but those didn't exist at the time because gangster movies barely existed. The very first feature-length film was the story of the Kelly Gang, made in Australia, which is mostly surviving. I think it was originally like an hour and a half to 2 hours long, but what's left is only like about 55 minutes or something. Again, lost in a fire, just like everything, but there's at least it's almost surviving from what I understand. But it's called The Story of the Kelly Gang, and it's about an actual gang of cowboys, I think, in Australia. Australian cowboys. But that's not quite the same thing as like the mafia genre and everything. Like they called them gangster movies at the time, and I think that's kind of how we still think of them. But like they weren't, even though like technically the cowboys were gangsters. At least in most cowboy movies you watch, they are the gangsters of the West. But we don't see them like that anymore. Or in movies, we don't really see that's just cowboy movies. It's kind of a different thing. It was very good, very well acted. That was the other thing. Because it's a silent movie again, I feel like acting for silent movies is very different for acting for talkies, but this was more like acting for talkies or just normal films as we call them now. Just movies. But this felt more in line with like a real movie, I guess, than like a silent film. The score was very good. That was another thing I was impressed with. I watched it on YouTube, but it was the Criterion Collection version. So the score was whatever's on that. There weren't any sound effects. It was all musical score. But like when like somebody was shooting into the air, they were playing like the cymbals to signify the shot. And they did a couple things I thought were neat like that. Incorporate the music into the sound effects, essentially. The story itself, like I said, might feel a little cliche nowadays, but it was like very original for its time. And I can see why people kept coming back to it, because it's like a very solid story, except for that bit that I talked about, which was maybe like 15 minutes of screen time. So a pretty big chunk, but still, after that, like it was a very good story, well told. I kind of wish it was like I thought, like he was training the girl to be the next gang leader or something instead of trying to make her his wife or whatever. I think that would have been a bit neat, but like that would have been like breaking the cliche before the cliche even happens yet, just because this was still very new and like things like that were unheard of in normal cinema for like a woman to take a role like that, I think. Oh, and like for the first Academy Awards, this was only up for one Oscar, and that was Best Original Story, which I'm guessing was the Best Original Screenplay of that particular award ceremony, because it like changed a lot in the early years, I think, all the award titles. But that's the only thing it was up for. I don't think it won. I should look it up. I don't actually care, really, who won or not. But I already mentioned the writing, so I'm not going to continue to talk about the writing just because it was nominated for Best Writing. Instead, I'll just move on and give it a rating. It usually takes me a minute anyway. I mean, actually, I'd probably just give it a 10 out of 10. There was that slow bit, but it was still like character developing moments and not a total loss. It just gets really slow for a bit. I would say it doesn't detract so much from the story that stops being a story for a bit. It's still there, like the story is still there, and they're still like doing stuff for this really slow point in the movie. I'll still remove like half a point. 9.5 out of 10. Very good, very early mafia movie that might be the first mafia movie, if you want to argue with people over whether it's this or Little Caesar, which happened 5 years later. So I'd argue it's this. All right, as always, like and subscribe, and feel free to leave any comments you feel like leaving. Like anything at all, even if it's just go to hell, you piece of crap or something. I mean, I'll probably delete that comment if you do. Not going to respond to it.